Hello everyone. So if you've ever looked at a tree in your garden and thought it's not quite the shape that you wanted, it's either too big, too bushy, or lopsided, or maybe it's got branches in the way like this little guy, but you're not too sure where to begin with pruning it back, then this video is for you. This was one of the first plants that I planted in my garden when we moved in here. It's called a Calpurnea aurea, or wild Laburnum. It's one of the most rewarding little trees you could plant. It gets covered in these beautiful yellow pea-shaped flowers throughout the year, but most prolifically in summer. Its name is kind of a joke. It's named after the Roman poet Calpurnius, who was an imitator of the poet Virgil, because the tree looks like it's just an imitation of the Virgilia tree. Aurea is Latin for golden, named after the golden flowers. I planted a chair at our entrance because I wanted a tree that wouldn't get too big, but would give us some dappled shade in our living room in the late afternoons. I didn't want a large tree that we'd have to just keep pruning to keep it the right size. Always choose the right plant for the right place. I've been wanting to do a video on how to approach pruning a tree, and I thought this would be a good sized example to use, but I feel a little guilty because I've neglected it for the last 2 months as I've been looking for an opportunity to actually do this video. Now you can see it's put all this energy into new foliage, which I'm unfortunately going to just be cutting right off. The first thing I do is to look at the tree and try to imagine what I'd like the tree to look like ideally. So in this case, I'd like it to be a little taller, maybe about another meter or so. I'd also prefer it if it had a main stem with smaller branches coming off it. I'm also wanting to use the space underneath for planting, so I'd like to have a bit more light and space underneath the tree. You can also see this branch here is in the way as you walk past, so that definitely needs to come off. Another issue is that as it gets bigger, it'll put weight on the fence and possibly do some damage to it, so that branch will have to come off too. Have a look for any branches like this one that head back into the middle of the tree and look to prune this back. You want to encourage as much light and airflow through the tree as possible. Try to imagine that everywhere that you prune, you're likely to get several branches forming at that node, so prune with that in mind. Before you prune, make sure you have all the tools you're going to need. Make sure that everything is sharp and sterilized. You don't want to be spreading any diseases between plants. Check out my video on the polyphagus shottle borer for how bad a fungal growth can actually be for a plant. Make sure that your tools are nice and sharp. There's nothing worse than trying to cut through something with blunt instruments. Remember that various cutting tools all have specific uses and specific sized branches that they can cut. If you can help it, try not to cut through something that's too thick for the implement you're using. In this case, I'm using secateurs, bypass pruners, and a saw. Just a simple tip, there are two ways that pruner blades cut. There are the bypass type and the anvil type. The most common kind, like these loppers, have a single-edged blade that slices past a thick base as it closes. This gives a much cleaner cut and is better for the plant. The anvil type has a blade that presses against the center of that lower base and is used for thicker pieces that you want to cut, but most often it actually crushes the branch at the same time, which is never ideal. So these are all the points I'm going to prune. You should generally try and cut as close to the stem as possible if you're trying to prevent new growth. When you're cutting away larger branches with a saw, you want to make sure you don't cause any tearing below the cut as the branch falls away. The best way to do this is to make your first cut underneath and slightly forward of where you eventually will make your final cut. So you'd make a small cut here, not too deep, about a third of the way in. Then you cut through from the top in front of this first cut, and the branch should just snap off with no tearing. Then you go back and clean up the cut how you want it with no risk of tearing. So that's what I'm left with after the pruning is done. A much smaller, neater tree which should grow into the shape that I really want. It's fairly straightforward. Don't be afraid to be drastic. Remember, most trees will recover quickly and easily when they're cut. If you cut the wrong branch or it looks horrific, don't stress, it's just temporary. Pruning is a necessary part of keeping plants healthy and even promoting flowering or fruiting. So don't think of it as a horrible thing. It's actually a natural process that would happen in nature too. Thanks so much for watching. Please like, subscribe and share the video with anyone you think might enjoy it. If you click the little notification bell below, as soon as a new video is up, you'll get a message. Otherwise, happy gardening. So you'd make